evening. And I hope I don't do death by PowerPoint, but I thought it was important to have some visuals to go along with the presentation. Let me first say again, Audrey, thank you very much for that wonderful welcome. And it was a joy joining you last evening. And thank you for your leadership within the social work program. Dr. Brad Sheafor, thank you very much for supporting this and making this, if not your brainchild from years and years ago, making it a part of your passion at this point in your life. Dr. D. McCubbin, oh, there you are. Thank you very much for welcoming me to your school and letting me be a part of your community. And to each of you who has made logistical commitments to assuring that I and my husband Donovan are here this evening and able to fully participate in the process. I want to do a little disclaimer because I want to fact check something. And those who participated in the earlier presentation, it is on page 13, section 1. Some of you won't know it, but I just wanted to make sure. So I went home and got the paper to make sure that I wasn't sending you in the wrong direction. But I may make reference to this a little bit later. So I have a few props down here, so if you see me reaching down, it's not that I'm trying to hide. It's actually that I'm going after my props. So tonight's presentation is entitled, What Really Drives the State of Disequity in the U.S. Today? Going Beyond Our Personal and Professional Comfort Zones. This presentation is really intended to make, if not all of us, hopefully most of us, a little uncomfortable in the space in which we sit today, because social work as a profession is about work and making things happen. It is about often challenging statuses that have led to and promote inequalities and disparities, and therefore, at the core of what I need to do as a social worker, speaking in the Social Work Month, is to help advance that significant agenda. The objectives for tonight are probably summarized in contributing to and promoting our critical examination to effectively address persistent health, economic, racial, and political inequalities. But the emphasis here is on a critical examination. What are the things that undergird these critical issues, and how do we, even if we're not social workers or social work students, but individuals interested in these critical issues, how do we view these issues? How do we engage participants for deeper examination of the meanings of health in race and health, inequality research, and differentiating between biologic, genetic, psychological, and social categorizations of people. We live in a time and an era when it's not really new, but it actually has taken a set of new terms in our social cultural environment, where the categorization of individuals has manifested in many unfortunate outcomes. Sometimes they have been dramatic to the point of death for individuals. Sometimes they have been more subtle. Sometimes they are anchored to historical issues. And sometimes they're about the Reconstructionist narrative of how individuals in control and power have tried to redefine what realities are in sake of advancing a narrow agenda. I am not speaking from a political perspective, so I'm not promoting a progressive agenda, I'm not promoting a conservative agenda, I'm certainly not promoting a socialist agenda, but I am talking about the vastness of the space in which we find ourselves, in which these narratives have created very real circumstances, and our students, our practitioners, our academicians have a responsibility to be keenly aware of this work, because in service to the individuals that we seek to address many issues for, they ask us for it if they don't demand it of us. We want to describe ways in which social work can contribute to health outcomes and other outcomes for practice and policy in changing a health environment. And we'd like to, I would like to provide specific examples in which social work has provided an added value in terms of service and health that promote and advance the eradication of inequalities of human right disparities. The one thing that I didn't put up here, and this is always the worst kept secret among social workers, everything social work ain't great. So the reality is I want to make a call to social workers to be attentive to these issues, because while I'm speaking in a social work positive agenda, I'm also going to be critical of not only social workers, but academicians writ large and researchers for what we often fail to do to advance some of these really critical causes. We sometimes do it benignly, but there are times in which through our inactions, we actually advance the inequities and we promote the disequity that is the foundation for my presentation tonight. I've given you all of that, but I really began from a place of positionality. And so for those of you who were at the 12 o'clock, a few of these slides are going to be repeat, but don't go to sleep. I promise you I'll try to take a slightly different bent here. But positionality speaks to reflexivity, the ability for a researcher, a practitioner, an academician to be present in his or her own, the person's own reality. Because it is being in presence with your own reality that you are enabling yourself to engage others. In social work and in other disciplines, we learn the phrase, or something similar to the phrase, start where the client or the patient is. Many of us have heard that, correct? Start where the patient or the client is. I want to disabuse any of you of the notion that any one of us can start where a patient or a client is. We start where a patient or a client is where we are capable of being. We are a critical part of the intersected relationship between the individual or the systems we serve, the ability to filter information, and the ability to mount effective interventions. If you have any doubt of this, look at the literature, whether that is in biomedical literature that has shown that healthcare providers disproportionately channel certain groups of individuals to certain types of care, even when blinded to the person's race, but reading a medical condition and seeing a particular name. Or when presented with a person's race, disproportionately move people of certain racial groups to the front of the line for treatments and other groups behind the line for care and treatment. And this literature is well documented. So we do have a subjectivity. And while I don't want to go so far as to say there's no room for objectivity, objectivity sometimes is overrated. Because objectivity in a historical context is often bounded by the things that make us comfortable or uncomfortable. And as a researcher, I know that I can use all kinds of mathematical approaches to eliminating variables by stating things like, well, you know that's too complex of a model, and you can't actually accommodate that many variables simultaneously. And so therefore the variables I choose to include speak to the variables that I choose not to include. The ways in which I construct the variables speak to the ways that I understand the variables. So your positionality, my positionality, is crucial in being able to be a necessary first step to being able to do the critical work of promoting a just society. This picture represents various perspectives on the dialogue of equity, equality, and liberation. In the first scene, we see an approach that was an early remedy to disparities, and it was equality. And as you see from the picture, the equality equation says, give everybody a step up. Well, if you're 3 feet tall trying to look over the fence and you get the same riser as the 6-foot person, you still can't see over the fence. The second, equity, recognizes that everybody doesn't start at the same place. And it says, for some, you may need to jumpstart a little bit further in order to help that person at least get to the point of some of the other individuals, being able to see over the fence. And And I know I did this earlier, so I'm gonna say it now. When I use the word fence, it is not a political statement in this context. I really mean that. This is an old cartoon, and therefore the fence was already there, or in the last frame, it was not there, which is really about promoting an agenda of liberation and asking the question, what's the purpose of the fence? That's a different question. So as the caption at the top reads, it really depends on what question you're trying to address as to how you mount interventions. And we all know as instructors, as practitioners, probably as parents, that if you pose the same question to 2 or more of your children with the same body of evidence, especially if it's something they want, you may get different answers. And you may get different answers on the same day, depending on where that individual is in his or her relationship to that desired object. So again, positionality is important, and the questions that we ask are really predicated on the kinds of solutions that we think are possible. Now, I'm not presenting a naive perspective to say to get to a liberation agenda is going to be or is the goal for everything, but it is just a different way of asking core and fundamental questions. What are we trying to achieve with the approaches and the interventions that we take? Another way of thinking about this, a subtitle in my presentation description, is speaking about the American dream. Let me say a few things about the American dream. And this is where I make reference to a number of things. But as this picture shows, the American dream is wrought with lots of perils. Everyone doesn't have the same experience of the American dream. And if you think about the word itself, and as I was doing some research and coming to this presentation, the word dream speaks to anesthetizing, sleeping, moving through a space in which we are not sometimes in our most heightened state of reality connection, but in a state of being connected to something we'd like to achieve, and that in that moment of quiescence, in that moment of slumber, we create a reality that is often promoted as equal and fair to all people, with no attention to how people have to traverse that pathway. I don't want to talk just about one group, and I'm not here to pit one group, and we get into these talks about equity and disequity and disparities. So as I go through my presentation, and I'll talk at moments about race, or I'll talk about gender, or I'll talk about class or economics, it's important to realize that I'm using those to exemplify a point, because the issues of inequity cut across all of those and often concurrently impact individuals in that state. So, the reference that I was making, here's another prop. In yesterday's New York Times, in section A, page 13, there's a and I quoted it earlier, and I was like, oh my goodness, did I use the right page reference? So I ran home and grabbed the paper to the hotel to make sure I did. But if you didn't read it, the title of the section is Latinos Were Lynched in West, Descendants Want to Know. The question that is addressed in that particular article, it comes from a woman whose great-grandfather was part of a massacre, a lynching of Mexican immigrants that was quite horrific. You'd have to read it for all the details. But at the end of the narrative, and she didn't know about this until recently, this was her great-grandfather, and she's much an adult like me. I won't call myself old, but she's an adult like me. But it ends with a very, very important statement. And the woman, her name is Arlinda Valencia, and it says, she adds, if you do not want something like this repeated, it's about time for the entire country to know the truth. And who tells our truth? Who tells our truth? And therefore, as I read that and I thought about today's presentation, it just reinforced for me the fact that the perspective of storytelling, and I don't mean storytelling as in the stories that we tell at bedtime. I don't mean storytelling that we tell people to put them away for the weekend or the night, but I mean the narrative that each and every one of us has. Each of us has a narrative that is uniquely ours and often connected to other individuals. Who tells that narrative? Who gets the privilege of capturing data, analyzing the data, and then writing that data up to convey a message about a group of people, about a disorder, about a situation? And therefore, part of my positionality argument, particularly to my academic colleagues and my practitioner colleagues, is that we have a sacred relationship to the reality that how we tell that story must be anchored more deeply and more justly to the real narratives and the varying narratives and the difficult narratives of individuals, and not just filtered through the lens of something I would like to happen, but to stop and pause. On that note of stopping and pausing, the Western European culture, and certainly in America, is not comfortable with pausing. Pausing, silence. It makes us nervous. Quiet is something that we don't do well in our westernized culture. Some cultures have an embedded pause time for reflection. We see it in cultures where you stop at midday and shut your shop, you go to lunch, you have a nap. Here, that's laziness. You're not being productive. You're not doing what you need to do. You need to burn the candle 24/7. What's wrong with you? You're not being active. You're being lazy. Telling a story about a personal narrative. Many of these, and I see smiles and noddings of the head, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you don't, afterwards I finally get to have a glass of wine and you can talk about it. But this American dream is not the same for all parties. And so part of the discussion today is to make us a little bit uncomfortable in that space of being very cautious about how we advance people's trajectory along what we think is a fair route to success, because everybody's route is not going to be paved the same way. Now I want to move into some arenas of healthcare and health service delivery, and I want to be cautious about my time because I was told I'm supposed to speak for a certain amount of time, but leave time for questions and responses, and I intend to do that. Mental and behavioral health is part of the inequity and the disparities. The Institute of Medicine, and I'm going to leave all of these slides, so whoever had Dean McCubbin, whomever we want to share them with within the college, it's fine. And I have references at the end, so please feel free to share broadly or not, based on how you feel that it would be beneficial to the community. The Institute of Medicine findings support that racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare exist, period. There's a comma there, but they exist. And I know I had the privilege of reviewing some of the IOM documents before they were published on Bridging the Chasm and others, and this was an important place in our American history when we acknowledged that these things were existent. Racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare occur in the context of broader historic and contemporary social, economic, inequality, and evidence of persistence and of racial and ethnic discrimination. All the stuff I was just talking about. The Institute of Medicine supports that and validates that. Gee, I could have had a VA. Some people didn't need the Institute of Medicine to validate that they were being discriminated against. Some people didn't need the Institute of Medicine to say that when I went to the healthcare provider or when I went to X entity, I was treated differently. Whether that's a woman who goes in and is told 50, 60 years ago, oh, that thing called menopause, it's in your head. Just take some tea and you'll be fine. Okay. Whether that's a transgender individual being told, well, if you would just conform to your gender identity, you wouldn't have all of these social ills and you wouldn't feel so depressed. Whether that's an individual experiencing domestic violence or interpersonal violence at the hands of someone who's supposed to protect them, and the person saying, well, I don't really believe that it unfolded that way because this person is the pillar of our community. How could that have happened? Or, as many of us in academia and others have read in recent years, look at what's happened in some of our athletic spheres. I'm Catholic by practice. Look at what happened in the Catholic Church. And let me suggest that it's not only happening in the Catholic Church. And I'm going to stop there before I get into real trouble. Examples of disparities for other groups. In a national survey of high school students, Hispanic adolescents reported more suicidal ideation and attempts than whites or blacks. Does that mean that every Hispanic student or Latino student is doing that? No, but we know that there are disparate experiences of it, and we need to pay attention and understand that how an individual's race and culture play out in the context. As the Institute of Medicine report says, all of this occurs in the broader context of contemporary and historical factors of economic inequality and social injustice. We have to pay attention. It's not okay to treat the person in my space in isolation of his or her relationship to the contemporary and the historical context. This is a founding element of the social work agenda. And we'll come to some of the strengths and shortcomings of that within social work later in my discussion. One of the areas in which social work has historically been identified as taking the lead is in the area of child and family welfare. Let me disabuse you of the fact, although it has happened, social workers don't only come in and take kids out of homes. Sometimes they actually come in to help stabilize individuals within the family context. But that stated, we have to realize that it's multiple elemental in its historical and contemporary experiences. Issues of housing, dilapidated housing, inadequate housing, homelessness. I can't imagine a social worker not being keenly aware that not all youth have the same housing situation. Healthcare. We talked about healthcare, and we'll continue to talk about healthcare. Access to healthcare, the utilization of healthcare can affect the way children are seen within the healthcare, within the child welfare system. Schooling, educational opportunities, but also just the presence or absence of adequate schools. In some jurisdictions, and I don't know all the stats for here locally, but I did look at some, when we think about schooling, some schools in the public sector, and I'll stick with the public sector and won't go into the private right now, there are some schools in the public sector that look like private schools of most. I know my nieces and nephew, I have 2 nieces and 1 nephew, they attend a public school that my sister and her wife decided that's where they want to send their kids because it's almost like a private school. And they have the privilege of being able to live in a high tax-based environment, and those kids are so ready for college as juniors and seniors. In fact, I was talking to my niece who's she's a junior, and she was talking about, now, do I take honors Spanish for 6 credits, or do I take AP, or do I take it? That's where her discourse is. Whereas in other spaces, just walking to school is a threat to your life. If the school is open on a regular basis and you get there, are the textbooks adequate, or are they textbooks from 15 years ago that you're sharing with 6 other people that have the pages ripped out of them? And the instructor is teaching a classroom of diverse learning needs students in a moment in time where they've got 60 people that they're trying to hold their attention who left inadequate housing, have inadequate nutrition, have poor health care because maybe they didn't diagnose something, and they're coming to school, and now as an instructor, I'm supposed to impart the great wisdom of Aristotle Dickens to someone who just got chased to school or had gunshots all night, didn't eat, and the parents are who knows where. But I am, as an instructor, held accountable. I call the social worker, and the social worker is the bad person now. The social worker, or not paying attention to the context, actually is a critical factor in our child welfare system. And it leads to disproportionality in individuals who get brought into adoptive and or foster care environments. And those individuals are held in those foster care environments much longer than individuals who have these forces or these social determinants well taken care of. Income and economic well-being, this is another critical element. In the United States, no fewer than 44 million out of 300 million, and that's clearly an underestimate, because in the United States, we talk about a poverty level that's predicated on the minimum wage value. We don't talk about it from what, as some folks would call it, a livable wage. We talk about the minimum wage. If any of us had to leave here, and unfortunately some of us do, and we see it occurring on college campuses across the country, where our students are facing very serious issues of inequity in food, in economics, instability of housing. They're living on the precipice of poverty. In fact, when I was the president of the National Association of Social Workers, we were looking at data for our social workers, and I don't want to call out a single jurisdiction, but there are jurisdictions in the United States where social workers are on food stamps at rates higher than their clients. These are people with graduate degrees. In recent studies that have been put out, we see how teachers have had to take second and third jobs in order to make ends meet. And I bet even on this campus, if it's like many other campuses in the United States, we're faced with issues of economic compression of salaries. And this again is not me advancing an agenda to run to your dean and ask for more money or the department chair. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is income and economic well-being, and the inequalities are real in our space. And we have to be mindful of these. And we see that the United States, its share of income earned by the top 1% is advancing, and that means that 99%ers, which might be most of us, if not all of us in the room, just at some point in our lives, probably are not benefiting at the same rate as the 1%ers. And those of us who are the 1%ers, I'll meet you for the second drink in the back of tonight's discussion. Criminal justice and human rights. We can go down the list, and I don't want to spend too much time here because I get kind of caught up in the Tony Robinsons, the Michael Browns, the Kamani Grays, the Kendrick McDade, the Trayvon Martins, and the countless other unnamed individuals through individual and mass executions, not always at the hand of our police or criminal justice individuals, but sometimes as an extension of a society that embraces certain behaviors that make this almost a numbing experience. I have a house in Connecticut, so I'm not too far from a place in Connecticut that some of you may have remembered when a group of kids in a school were massacred, and I'm talking really little kids. You in Colorado have had your own share of horrendous experiences and know very intimately what that feels like as a community when you have to grapple with the aftermath of this. So again, I'm not talking just about policing, but I'm talking about a system of human rights, of criminal justice. We talk about a society of blind justice. I want to rip that Band-Aid off of her eyes and say, look at the injustices and help us to correct those. It is time for us not to be blind to the inequities, but to make movements to resolve the inequities. The longer we stay blind and and anesthetized to these things, the longer these injustices prevail. As a social worker, as a researcher, it is incumbent upon me to speak truth to power in that regard. Physical and public health, this is my domain. Finally got to the slide that's in my real domain. When we talk about non-elderly adults with selected health conditions, and I know that in the college, I have lots of colleagues and experts who know much more about many of these diseases, but we know it's not an even representation of asthma amongst children. And much of this is the result, or adults for that matter, but particularly amongst children who live in congested environments, sub-housing conditions, etc. Diabetes, the proportion of diabetes that is related to genetic factors, environmental factors, food factors, exercise factors, etc. Having a doctor, told by a doctor they've had a heart attack or heart disease, again, it's not an equal playing field. So we can't act as if it is, and then access to the types of care that are available are not equal for all either. We live in a country where if you have the resources or you live with a medical school or a health providing system down the street, your likelihood of surviving beyond a low age group is greater, but if you don't have those accesses, you die. This is simple as that. You become morbid, and then morbidity sets in, whether it's diabetes or asthma, and then mortality strikes. The end comes sooner. There's no quiet way to say that other than in a country that has the highest per capita expenditure on healthcare, for us to have the kind of healthcare outcomes and persistent inequalities, it's a shame. It is just a shame. And that, again, is not a political partisan statement. It is a statement of a body of evidence. And that is not saying that I want to move to a particular type of care, socialized. I'm not talking about universal care for all. I'm saying we have to begin to look at multifactorial approaches to these kind of persistent inequalities if we're going to talk about these inequalities at all. I want to spend a few slides talking about my own research because I see I have a few minutes left. I was the protocol chair of an HIV prevention study that began in 2013, and we finished our enrollment in 2015, and we followed people for an entire year, so we actually closed up the data in 2015. And in the era of HIV and AIDS, we are in a great moment in time. We have medications that can both prevent the acquisition of HIV for HIV-negative individuals if the medication is taken properly, and it can prolong the life of individuals who are HIV infected. So we live in a great moment in time. I'm looking in the room, and we're in a value-free zone here, but I think some of you might remember back, as I do, to 1980, 1981, the early years of the epidemic, and what the face of AIDS looked like when we started talking about it, the fear, the trauma, the experiences. We're in a different place, and that's a blessing. That is a wonderful thing. But what we know is that everybody doesn't benefit the same way. And I have to say here that even though I was privileged to be the protocol chair, the PI of this very major study looking at African American men in the United States and their ability to access, utilize, and benefit this medication in the entire history of the United States HIV prevention arena that finances, and that's like a 30-year history. I was the first Black domestic male to head a protocol in that network over a 30-year period. And my team was comprised of all Black gay men in leadership positions, the intervention developer, the behavioral scientist, and my co-PI. And boy, I can't tell you how many times NIH wanted to know, how did you achieve overall participation rate a year out of 92%? We must have got asked that question so many times that we started writing up different ways of saying it so we wouldn't bore ourselves telling them each time the data are the data. Why do you keep asking us? And part of it is because we did what I said in the very beginning. We listened to the narrative of the individuals and developed an intervention that was grounded in the contextual reality in which individuals experienced the epidemic. We didn't promote the pill, but we started with where individuals were because we knew we needed to suspend our views about taking a pill, even though the pill could help you. But we needed to stop and understand housing, economics, schooling, employment, incarceration in that context for these men. So it was a successful study, and the article just came out this month, and I have a link to it, shameless self-promotion. Providing theory-based, culturally tailored programs can be beneficial. Our study demonstrated that the utilization of an intervention that was grounded on social work principles can be very advantageous, and that our findings promoted a public health gap. There's my self-promotion. Since I'm going to give the slides, I won't keep that up there very long. Aging, and in the hour that we've been talking, we've all aged. The agenda that cannot wait, or can it, or in fact, or well, actually. Somebody gave me that quote today. Well, actually, can this agenda wait when we're looking at a demographic shift from 2016 to what it's going to look like in 2050 when the majority becomes the minority? Are we paying attention to what aging health and healthcare services will need to look like as the demographic shift ensues? This is really critical material if we're going to provide aging individuals, and boy, I want to age much more, with the kinds of adequate health care that they need. And when we talk about people of color, we're talking about Hispanic, Latino, Asian, and other racial and ethnic groups who are non-white identified. And the shift is going to happen. When we talk about our health disparities, some things change, but some things really don't change. And when you really think about it, and I was watching a movie yesterday, and many of us, again, have lived through this and have seen this in real spaces in real time with white and colored water fountains, but impose Flint, Michigan, 2016 over that, and it's the same thing. Certain groups of individuals were more impacted by the poor quality of water through the dilapidation of an infrastructure. And that's not to say that somebody did it intentionally, but it happened and it was pocketed within groups of people. We can't deny that these things are happening and continue to happen. And as the Institute of Medicine Health Studies said, it happens in a context that manifests itself today. Diseases all over the place, health status, unhealthy days, limited activities, diabetes. This just reinforces things that I've said already. The social determinants of health oftentimes undervalue the social component, and it goes immediately to the biomedical or even the psychological and doesn't address the social. Very often the debate is, as I said earlier, it's too complex. How can you take on these really Herculean issues and no one can change the world? Well, I don't want to, again, be naive, but if we don't start to chip away at that beast, when will we ever get the solutions that we say we hope to accomplish? So our social determinants, as we've been talking about, I've been talking about to you for a while, early childhood development, education, employment, job security, food security, health services, housing, social inclusion or exclusion, stigma, all contribute to the disparities that we see in health outcomes. Our challenges are social and economic drivers, again, limited access, incarceration, stigma, multiple ways and multiple sources kind of converge on the same set of themes. But when we take a deeper look at what social work, and this is me coming into the last lap here, what is it that social work needs to do or can do? It's the tip of the iceberg to be able to just say these are problems, or that we hold some kind of hegemonic superiority over interventions and solutions, because if we did, we would have solved these problems. The persistence of the problems belies the fact that we do not hold singularly the answer within our professional domains, and we have to acknowledge that. Social work, the professional contributions, have to address within the academic sphere and the practice sphere, what are the social problems that we're trying to address? Back to the equity slide early, what's the solution that we're trying to accomplish, and what are the real building blocks to those problems? In our society, there's so many problems. What are the priorities? We can't tackle them all at once. Who gets to make the decision on priorities? And priorities in power have a very interesting way of playing out in our social system. Social programs and interventions, who gets to select which social programs and which social interventions are prioritized? Social and political processes, who gets to have access to social and political processes? In order to run for an elected position today, I mean, people say it's going to cost you millions of dollars really to even get into the race. I think we just saw an election where many unknown women moved in, but they didn't do it quietly. They did it in mass, and I have this hope that many of them got together and put their minds to the fact that we as women are not going to be left out of this cycle. We are not going to let his story dictate our future narrative. Research and evaluation and translational efforts from a scientific, a research and academic perspective have to incorporate these ideas, these concepts that I've been promoting in our discussion. The added value of what we do as social work practitioners, I think it's important for us to reach across the fences to our other disciplines as we seek to address these problems. We have to have critical attention to monitoring, measuring, and modifying, quantifying what we do. Researchers in the room, RO1 does not equal ROI. Just because I know, research, I put that out there a particular way. Researchers, those of you who are not familiar, I saw some of the faces, one of the most coveted awards types that you can get, particularly from the National Institute of Health and others, is a Research One. It's an investigator-driven award. It says that you put forth an idea that is scientifically rewarded with this grant. But getting that award doesn't mean it automatically has a positive return on investment, because actually, when you even look at the NIH's own portfolio, almost 60 to 70 or more % of the findings never get translated into action. They result in papers for the investigator and don't turn into actionable outcomes for the communities that individuals said that they were doing their work on behalf. So the investigator gets elevated, but the situation doesn't change. And unfortunately, and I've probably been guilty of this too, many of our papers conclude with, and more research needs to be done. Well, heck, when does the research stop and change occur? Social workers and other disciplines are known by our actions as much as our words or our inactions. And I want to focus on the lower half of this. How do we embody this in our actions? Along the way, some have lost their way. There are times in which, as a senior colleague, I work with other colleagues who almost have forgotten why they entered the discipline. Why did you come into this field, and are you sitting in an academic space pushing forth an agenda that is your agenda, and have you lost that compass of passion that your students are asking you to bring to the table, and as are our clients? Assuring that we are not perpetuating historical and social traumas we espouse to eradicate. Again, I told you I would put some of the ugly in with some of the good. It's important for us to pay attention to the fact that we have to listen to the things that we say and make sure we're not advancing social disequity and inequality in the work that we do. Speaking truth to power is more than a cliche, and people have talked about academic, scientific activists. I think some of us need to return to that. Creating as responsiveness to making and sustaining brave spaces, meaning, safe spaces is an overrated place because I can't guarantee safety, but creating room for our junior colleagues to be able to go into brave spaces and not deem them as horrible colleagues because they challenge our way of thinking is crucial for us to do that. Broadening the concepts of race, as I talked about earlier, we have to have different ways that you can substitute race for gender, for economics. We have to have broader terminologies and the capacities to see beyond what you see as a surface. Because even in doing the research with Black men, one of the things that we did and we paid very close attention to, everything that looks like me doesn't think like me. And so every person, you put me and Clarence Thomas on the same stage, we'll both be classified as Black men, but I suspect our underlying ideologies would look different, and not just our political ideologies. And some, I try to be a little humorous. But we have to have different ways of seeing this. We have to challenge, we have to promote healthcare reform, social and cultural demographic realities require this. We have to participate in federal, local, and state annual budget initiatives. We have to have social and cultural reforms in immigration, biological, and technological, religious, and human rights. And we have to increase our ability to engage partners from the private sector and entrepreneurial spaces. They're often waiting for us to get out of our silos and to ask them to be partners, to join in some of these battles. Social workers, we're keen on things that we hold sacred, and I want to reinforce this. The person and environment approach, as you saw in that Institute of Medicine statement, that's our domain. Claim it. Don't run away from it. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me, I've been on panels where someone from another discipline has talked about, well, and context is really important. We identify that context is important. I'm like, you identify what? We've been talking about this in social work for a long time. Case to cause means that I have to take individual pieces of data and make them part of a macro agenda, and make a macro agenda connected to individual pieces so that I can understand in the bidirectional relationship. We have to be non-victim blaming, and we have to pay attention to indigenous knowledge, that knowledge that comes from individuals who live and experience. Stop, pause, and listen. Interpret, ask questions. We have to ask the critical questions. What do we do? Why do we do it? And what difference does it make? I always like this one because this is my 3 W's, Wheeler, 3 W's, teaching mantra. What do we do? The skills, practices, and tools. That's a whole other presentation. Why do we do it? The concept, constructs, and theories. And the what difference does it make? That added value component. In closing, making meaningful change will require us to advance our terminology in meaningful and impactful ways. We'll have to translate our results into communicative formats that can reach general populations and not just colleagues within our professional spheres or in our academic spheres. We have to expand our ability to articulate a return on investment beyond the individual return on investment. This is really important, particularly, because the academy, we're being hit, and I suspect the state system is too. People are, well, what do you do all day? Do you work? I mean, you just go into a classroom and talk. We have to be able to talk about what benefit the work that we do has for our civic and our community partners. And finally, we need to develop critical strengths and asset-based approaches, not only to race, but important research inequity agendas. We have to create space to redo the lack of self-directed social, political, and economic spaces. Again, this indigenous knowledge. And I leave you with 3 quotes from Epstein in his book on welfare in American society and how social science fails the poor. And he states, and not necessarily in this order, there may not be easy remedies for the large social problems in the United States. Again, I'm not naive. We know that they're not going to be easy fixes. Second, he states the ability to identify cause has eluded social scientists even when it has been technically possible. Again, how we select what we want to focus on and how we deselect things that make us uncomfortable. And three, liberal and conservatives have made peace with political constraints that deny the necessary resources to address these inequalities. Again, calling on all sides of the political spectrum to be held accountable for the things that we have failed to do to promote an active agenda. I hope that I have not put you all to sleep, because I did talk about a dream, and I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I believe we have a bit of time for questions and responses. Thank you.